Zecharia Sitchin, that the many names of the gods and goddesses of the various empires throughout ancient history were actually the same pantheon of gods revealed in the tens of thousands of clay tablets discovered in the ruins of the royal library of Ashurbanipal in the Assyrian city of Nineveh, dating back to the 7th century BC. Convenience of the populace, they were gods to the people they mastered, but in fact they were a small group of very real visitors of an advanced race called the Anunnaki. These were the ones who started the Sumerian civilization and later the Assyrian, Egyptian, Persian, Hittite, Akkadian, Indian, Chinese, pre-Inca, Toltec, Mayan and Olmec civilizations. How could the Anunnaki have been known by and have interacted with all these various civilizations over a very long period of history? The answer to this is that they had an extremely long lifespan compared to ours. Exactly how long was never revealed, but the texts indicate that their lifespans changed while they were living on Earth. At least one, Marduk, died a natural death. His body was preserved with oils and encased in a coffin in Babylon. His body was viewed by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. As indicated by the tablets, his lifespan on Earth would have been around 331,000 years. This video, however, is not aimed at convincing you of the existence of these visitors to our world. Zecharia Sitchin spent a lifetime studying this ancient enigma and wrote 14 books explaining his research. This video is meant to try to shed light on one aspect touched on very little by Sitchin or any other researchers of this ancient puzzle. It is a question that continued to haunt me after spending so much time understanding his work, which carefully explained how this small group, for good or for bad, helped jump-start humanity and civilization around the world. I say small group because the tablets tell us that there were only 600 at the height of their occupation, and that they were led by two brothers, Enlil and Enki, and their offspring. These two were the supreme leaders on earth, assisted by their sons and daughters, known by their worshippers as gods and goddesses. Enlil was given the title of Lord of the Command, while Enki was Lord of the Earth. In our terms, these titles would equate to Mission Commander and Senior Scientist. For this short video, we cannot go into the entire story as explained in Sitchin's 14 books, so I will focus on only two aspects. First, the various names by which these visitors from the two families were known in the various civilizations. I did not put together this list by happenstance, but as a result of a thorough personal research project, beginning with Sitchin's discoveries and following on with studies of available translations of ancient writings, scholarly books, and similar depictions of mostly ancient stone carvings. The second aspect is how the Norse gods of supposed mythology fit into the Anunnaki puzzle of ancient mankind. Visitors were treated as absolute gods by all humanity with whom they came into contact. They taught their knowledge to the various civilizations, sometimes for their own benefit, and sometimes for the benefit and self-sustainment of their worshippers. Each civilization gave them their own names, but they were single individuals who lived over a long span of time. The creation of civilizations, the ties to the gods of the various civilizations, have been researched and written about by many in addition to Sitchin. The megalithic temples, pyramids, fortresses, and even the early cities across the planet, which to this day cannot be explained by traditional archaeologists, engineers, or scholarly historians, are testament to the gods' existence. The one mythology which has had little attention or effort to tie it back to the Anunnaki is that of the Norse gods. The story of the Anunnaki, as explained by the tablets, can be followed in a logical timeline which follows the progression of the civilizations as they grew into their own periods. The beginning, as is accepted by archaeologists and scholars, is the Sumerian civilization of Mesopotamia. This was the civilization that documented the name Anunnaki, which means those who from heaven to earth came. What the scholars will not admit, though, is that there is no earthly explanation for the meteoric rise of mankind from barely surviving hunter-gatherers to a thriving civilization with advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, writing, music, poetry, agriculture, animal husbandry, engineering, public administration and government. In evolutionary terms, this rise happened overnight. As humanity's population grew and spread out across the planet, the Anunnaki offspring from the original two leaders, Enki and Enlil, also grew. The Anunnaki Senior Council, headed by Anu, decided to grant lordships to their offspring in new areas. Enlil became the overlord of Asia and Europe, and Enki the overlord of Africa. The Sinai and the lands of what is now Israel were handed over to Ninmah, one of the two sisters of Enlil and Enki. The new lands of West and South America, now known as Bolivia and Peru, became the province of Enlil and his sons, while the northern and eastern areas of Central America, Mexico including the Yucatan, became the province of Enki and his sons. Enlil's son, Marduk, took over Egypt from his brother Ningishida, who then took some of his followers to the Central American region. Marduk became known as the Egyptian god Ra, Ningishida became known as Kukulkan to the Mayans, and Quetzalcoatl to the Toltecs, and later the Aztecs. Their mission of the Anunnaki, as it had been from the beginning, was to gather gold for removal to their home world. To do this they needed the manpower provided by humanity. In order to use the manpower they needed to ensure that the masses could sustain themselves. Thus they imparted knowledge to help accomplish their end goals. In the meantime they were worshipped by their followers for the great powers they possessed. They assigned kings to manage the people and priests and priestesses to impart the knowledge and guide the people on how to worship and provide for the deity's every wish. The mission begins to fall apart, unfortunately. The Anunnaki's mission also brought warfare upon mankind. Warfare, as documented in many ancient writings, including the Bible's Old Testament, in most cases was ordered by the gods. Some of the Anunnaki offspring were not satisfied with the realms they'd been given, and decided to expand their empires into other realms through the capture of territory, causing bad blood between the two clans and massive wars. The main instigator of this bad blood was Enki's son Marduk. To make matters worse, Marduk decided to marry a female human. Up to this point, sexual relations and interactions with the human women was strictly forbidden. The wedding announcement went out far and wide to include the Anunnaki workers, who were designated to provide off-world support in transporting gold and supplies. This group was described as 300 strong and given the title Igigi, those who observe and see. 200 Igigi were invited down to Earth for the grand wedding. Enlil was incensed by the blatant disregard by Marduk for their strict rules, but an even more dire consequence came from Marduk's rebellious actions. The announcement stoked a long-held suspicion and resentment in the Igigi that this had been going on for a long time. That resentment was that they were being left out of tasting the forbidden delights of the female humans. Prior to this, the Igigi were allowed to take their shore leave, so to speak, on Earth at Baalbek in what is now Lebanon, but were not allowed to mingle with the humans. So the Igigi devised a plan that when they came for the wedding, they instead would go out and take female humans for themselves. If this sounds like a fantasy, you will find that it is described in the Old Testament, most of which came directly from the ancient writings of the tablets. Genesis 6 verses 1 to 2 reads, "When humankind began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humankind were beautiful. Thus they took wives for themselves, from any they chose." Enlil was enraged by this traitorous act, and banished the Igigi for their actions. Again from the Bible, Genesis 6, verse 3 reads, "So the Lord said, My spirit will not remain in humankind indefinitely, since they are mortal. They will remain for 120 more years." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after this, when the sons of God were having sexual relations with the daughters of humankind, who gave birth to their children. They were the mighty heroes of old, the famous men. So the Igigi in the Sumerian texts were the Nephilim in the Bible. The Igigi, now banished by Enlil, became followers of Marduk and Enki. Why the northern regions? Now we need to jump to why the Anunnaki ended up in the northern regions. Among the continuing strife between the clans, as if a forerunner to Romeo and Juliet, Inanna, the granddaughter of Enlil and a powerful goddess in her own right, fell in love with one of Enki's sons, Dumuzi. They were married sometime around 3100 BC. Marduk opposed this marriage because he hated Enlil and his whole side of the family. In his mind they stood in his way of becoming the single most powerful ruler on earth, which he believed was his right. Marduk was so enraged by the marriage that he devised a plan to destroy it through planned seduction and betrayal. The plan worked so well that Dumuzi panicked and ran away in the dark. He slipped and fell on some rocks, killing himself in a freak accident. This started a long and bitter war between Inanna and Marduk, which ended in Marduk's near death and final exile by a council of the Anunnaki. The texts do not say where he went during his exile, but during this time he was known by the Egyptians as Amun-Ra, the unseen Ra. We know from the texts where he could not go because many parts of the earth had been divided up. The places taken at the time were areas around the Mediterranean, Africa, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, and Central and South America. A hint is given in the translations by Sitchin in the Lost Book of Enki. With Sarpanet and Nabu to a land of no return he departed, to a place where horned beasts are hunted with wife and son he went. So I believe that what happened is Enki took his son Marduk and the Igigi followers with their spouses to northern Europe and the Scandinavian lands. Enki became Odin and Marduk became Thor of Norse mythology. The Igigi became all the other gods and goddesses in Norse mythology, numbering in the hundreds. Norse mythology compared with Sumerian texts. Norse mythology is a collection of beliefs and stories shared by northern Germanic tribes in what is mostly now Scandinavia. The mythology was orally transmitted in the form of prose, a loose storytelling poetry which helped them remember the stories before the adoption of writing. Our knowledge about it is mainly based on the medieval texts written down during and after Christianization of the area. Nothing else was ever written into documents. The Prose Edda is one of the two Old Norse compilations put together in Iceland in the early 13th century. It can be gathered from the prose that there were considered to be slightly fewer than 300 gods and goddesses worshipped by the ancient Norse people in what is now Scandinavia. The description of the chief god, Odin, fits almost exactly the Sumerian description of Enki. Odin was a seeker and giver of wisdom, fitting well with Enki the scientist.